They always talk tough until you make the move they swore you couldn't. The one wrapped in silence, soaked in calculation. Not the move that screams chaos, but the one that ends it. See, anyone can throw punches in the middle of a storm, but few have the foresight to wait to study every twitch, every lie disguised as kindness, every manipulative handshake pretending to be alliance. And then one day, you don't flinch, you don't shout, you press, one move, the kind that flips the entire board. And suddenly, they're choking on their own confidence. You didn't just outsmart them, you outlasted their ego. That was the real checkmate. They spent so much time trying to corner you, they didn't notice the trap was never yours, it was theirs. Built brick by brick from every assumption they made about you. Too emotional, too slow, too forgiving. They confused your restraint for weakness, not realizing you were just letting them decorate their own downfall. Psychology 101. The ones who talk the most about power are usually the ones who've never held it properly. You didn't move with bravado, you moved with precision. Like a surgeon removing the disease they didn't know had metastasized into their own narrative. And when you made that final move, the silence was deafening, not for you, for them. Because they finally realized you'd seen this ending long before they began. They weren't afraid of your rage, they were afraid of your understanding. Rage is predictable, calculable. But when someone understands how your mind works, when they realize you knew their patterns, their tells, their cycles, they panic. Because suddenly, the story they told themselves about being in control collapses. You didn't just win the game, you rewrote it. Your final move wasn't spontaneous, it was spiritual. The culmination of restraint, memory, and pain alchemized into clarity. That's the kind of checkmate that doesn't just end a round, it haunts the next one, and the one after that. They trained for a battle, but you studied for a war. And wars aren't won through noise. They're won through patience, through shadow walking, through subtle shifts in energy that only the sensitive can detect. You let them misread you, let them think they were ahead. And then you pulled the trigger on a move so quiet, so clean, it made the whole arena freeze. That's what disturbs them now. You didn't scream, you didn't flail, you just acted. And action, when stripped of approval, is terrifying, because it reveals what people actually fear, someone who doesn't need permission to win. They were playing poker, you were playing prophecy. They were bluffing with borrowed chips, and you were carrying ancestral strategies in your DNA. They tried to distract you with drama, bait you with guilt, lure you into a cycle of over-explaining your worth, but you didn't bite, you built in silence. And when the time came, your move shattered every blueprint they had about how this would end, because deep down, they knew this version of you was possible. They just hoped they'd break you before you found it. That's why the final move hit so hard. It wasn't just unexpected, it was inevitable. And now they fumble with narratives, try to repaint the timeline, try to play victim to the same player they once mocked. But there's no undoing a move that shifts the entire board. The pieces don't return to their places. The power doesn't reset. Once you've exposed the illusion, the magician can't go back to being mysterious. You saw through them. And worse, you let them keep performing until the spotlight burned through their lies. You made the final move, not with malice, but with mastery. And that's what echoes, not rage, but control. See, true power is when your presence alone makes people reconsider their choices. When your silence rattles louder than their insults, when your decisions don't need justifications because they reveal the game itself. That's the kind of presence you've cultivated. You didn't destroy them, you clarified them. And clarity is the cruelest truth in a world built on illusion. They feared that all along. That you'd reach a point where you no longer reacted, only responded. That you'd see the strings and cut them without blinking. And now they sit there, stunned, speechless, scrambling for meaning in a space you've already outgrown. Let them panic, let them gasp at the elegance of your move, because that's the true flex, when you win without lifting your voice, when your progress becomes the punchline to their arrogance. The old version of you might have needed closure, apologies, understanding. This version only needs movement, and you moved like someone who knew their patterns, knew their thresholds, knew when to hold back and when to end it. The game wasn't over because you got lucky. It ended because you finally stopped playing by their rules and started enforcing your own. And now they tell stories about you, but their voices shake because no one saw it coming. That's the brilliance of the final move. It hides in plain sight. It walks like surrender. But it's a surgical strike. Your evolution wasn't loud. It was methodical. You didn't need their validation. You needed their absence. And once you got it, you built an empire so resilient it reflects every stone they threw. And now, the scoreboard isn't even a contest. It's a eulogy to the illusions they clung to. You didn't just win. You made the concept of game obsolete. Because when your final move is done right, there's no rematch, no retaliation, just stunned silence and the slow realization that they were never in control. You didn't just shift power, you redefined it. You are the end of the illusion, the proof that strategy beats noise, that presence outweighs performance, that the most terrifying move is the one they never saw coming because they were too busy underestimating the player. You weren't after revenge, you were after resolution. And now, it's game over. Permanently, they used to whisper your name with mockery in their throat and amusement in their eyes. You were the example they held up when they needed to feel better about their fragile identities. The conversation stopper at dinner tables, the warning label they stuck on every wall of their comfort zone. Don't end up like that one, they said. You were the story they told with a tilted smirk about failure, about fragility, about someone who just couldn't keep it together. But what they mistook for collapse was transformation. What they saw as weakness was shedding. They had no idea the version they were laughing at was a temporary cocoon. You weren't drowning, you were disappearing, so you could return unrecognizable. They laughed because they thought you were done, because they needed to believe they were better. It's easier to label someone broken than to question the system that broke them. You became their security blanket, the living justification for their mediocrity. At least I'm not them, they'd mutter, blind to the fact that your silence was not submission, it was recalibration. While they spoke your downfall like prophecy, you were stitching together something ancient behind the scenes. Something they couldn't comprehend because they had never been exiled, never been betrayed, never been burned in the way you were. You weren't supposed to recover. That was the entire point of the story they created, because your resurrection would be their reckoning. But resurrection never asks for permission. It doesn't knock, it explodes. And when you came back, you didn't come for applause. You came with evidence, with posture, with a gaze that burned through pretense. Suddenly, the cautionary tale was walking into rooms with quiet authority. The same people who mocked you now stumble over their own words, unsure how to address the phoenix they tried to bury in ashes. The story no longer fits, and that terrifies them. Because your evolution is an indictment of their cowardice. You didn't just survive the narrative, they now choke on it every time you succeed in silence. You were once the punchline, but now you're the plot twist, and not the kind that makes people clap, the kind that leaves them pacing their rooms at night, wondering how they got it so wrong. The world they built was made of shadows and shallow victories. Yours was carved from endurance. They wrote you off during the first act, forgetting that every protagonist is misunderstood before the climax. Now, they avoid eye contact not out of shame, but confusion. Because in the mythology they created, you weren't allowed to return. Your story was closed, shelved, buried. But here you are, rising without vengeance, winning without noise, shifting rooms just by entering them. There's a special kind of horror that comes from watching your cautionary tale thrive. They said you were too emotional, too soft, too broken, and now those same traits have become your superpowers. Your empathy turned into intuition, your silence became precision, your exile became solitude, and in that solitude you found the clarity to build. That's what scares them. You didn't play their game. You rebuilt the board. While they were performing for each other, you were building for yourself. You didn't need to prove them wrong. You just needed to become the kind of person whose existence does that without speaking a word. The irony is too rich. You were their cautionary tale, yet now they follow your every move in secret. They watch your progress through burner accounts, and tight-lipped conversations. The same ones who labeled you now mirror your habits. They echo your phrases, they study your strategy, but they'll never admit it, because to acknowledge your rise is to confront their own stagnation. And they'd rather live in denial than evolve. That's what separates you. You used pain as a blueprint. They used comfort as a cage. And now they're left telling stories that no longer apply to the person you've become. They told people not to be like you until people started wanting to be like you. The joke turned into a legacy. Their mockery aged poorly, while your silence matured into a movement. You didn't need revenge. You became the evidence that time, patience, and alignment are the real weapons. Now they flinch not at your words, but at your presence, because your presence reminds them of what they tried to destroy. And worse, it reminds them that they failed. Their narrative couldn't hold you. Their words couldn't define you. And now they have to rewrite every lie they told themselves, every whispered insult, every fake smile. You became the person they secretly feared you might turn into. That's why they pushed you so hard, because somewhere deep in their gut, they knew you had it in you. That if you ever turned inward instead of outward, if you ever stopped explaining and started executing, it would be over for them. Because the only power they had was perception, and you shattered it. Now you walk like someone who doesn't carry shame but carries standard. You don't react, you reflect. And in that reflection, they see the version of themselves they were too scared to become. You were once their favorite cautionary tale. Now, you are their unspoken curriculum, the lesson they refuse to acknowledge, but privately study, because deep down, they know they didn't misjudge you. They feared you. And now, every step you take is a revision of their script. Every win you earn is a contradiction to their warnings. You didn't ask for this role, but you wear it like a second skin. Not to gloat, but to remind the world that labels are lies. Shame is a detour, and no one gets the final word on your story except you. You were once their tale of what not to be. And now, you're the proof of everything they'll never reach. And now they can't even speak your name without choking on the residue of their own arrogance. You've become a symbol they can't sanitize, a story that escaped their narrative trap. Their version of you was supposed to die in that chapter they closed for you. But you didn't just survive, you edited the entire genre. And the audacity of it, you did it without their permission, without their applause, without even a single explanation. You moved with the kind of grace that terrifies egos. Quiet power, clean exits, unapologetic growth. That's the real threat to those who build their thrones on gossip and performative strength. You've left them in a purgatory of their own, design-trapped between who they claimed you were and who you've actually become. So let them keep telling stories. Let them rehearse their versions in dark corners and echo chambers, because every time they speak your past, they betray how deeply your present haunts them. You are no longer the warning. You are the reversal, the one who didn't stay broken, the one who didn't play dead. You rewrote the aftermath. And now, you walk like prophecy fulfilled, no longer seeking closure, but being it. Their cautionary tale grew claws, grew wings, grew silent. And now, the lesson lives in your stride, in your stare, in your presence that doesn't beg to be seen, but forces acknowledgement from even the most bitter spectators. You're no longer the one people fear becoming. You are the one they fear they never had the courage to be.